So I want you to imagine the year 1982.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah, put yourself in like a crowded, poorly ventilated hotel ballroom on a Saturday afternoon. The tabletop game Advanced Dungeons and Dragons is, well, it's exploding into mainstream culture.
Right, it's finally moving out of basements and into these massive convention halls.
Exactly. But if you were to walk from table to table and just watch the way people are actually playing the game at these early conventions, it is utter, unmitigated chaos.
Oh, it was basically the Wild West of tabletop gaming.
Yeah.
I mean, you had players showing up to the same table with completely different interpretations of the core rules.
It sounds like a nightmare for whoever is running the game.
It really was. You know, one person brings a character they rolled up in their kitchen who has like magical items that effectively make them a demigod.
Right.
And they were sitting down right next to someone whose character can barely swing a basic sword. There was just no standardization, no shared baseline at all.
And the clashes between players and, between players and the people running the games, those were legendary.
Absolutely legendary.
Well, today we are taking a deep dive into our stack of archival sources, including some really fascinating historical retrospectives, to look at one specific artifact from that chaotic era.
Yeah, this is a fun one.
It really is. It is this incredibly fragile 16-page pamphlet from 1982. It's called The Egg of the Phoenix. It carries the module code R3, and it was written by a designer named Frank Mentzer.
Frank Mentzer, yeah, a huge name.
And our mission today is to explore how this, obscure limited edition booklet didn't just feature some of the most bizarre, mind-bending stories in gaming history, but actually served as the genetic blueprint for modern, organized tabletop play.
It really did.
Okay, let's unpack this, because the story of this little pamphlet goes in directions I never would have expected.
What's fascinating here is that this isn't just a story about a fantasy game. It serves as a literal snapshot of a company, TSR Incorporated, undergoing a massive, turbulent corporate metamorphosis.
The behind-the-scenes drama is almost as wild as the game itself.
Oh, for sure. If you look closely at the in-game stakes of this module, the traps, the narrative whiplash, the punishing mechanics, they perfectly mirror the real-world design ambitions and the internal corporate chaos surrounding its creation.
Which is such a cool way to look at it.
Yeah, to really understand the document, you have to understand what it felt like to actually sit down and play it.
So let's start right there with the actual player experience. Because R3 was actually the third part of a 4-part sequence.
Right, the R series.
Yeah. And the sources highlight how the first 2 modules, R1 and R2, pull off this incredibly elaborate deception on the people playing the game.
They are meticulously designed to lull the players into a false sense of security. I mean, if you were playing R1, your objective was totally straightforward.
Search quests, right.
Basically, yeah. You are fetching silver dragon-controlled potions for a dragon named Falks. It feels like completely standard, run-of-the-mill fantasy fare.
Okay, so just typical D&D stuff.
Exactly. Then you move into R2, and the plot shifts to investigating a seemingly benign slavery ring of mind-controlled semi-humans called slinks.
Right, the slinks.
And what makes it feel grounded is that these slaves are legally owned by local merchants. The practice is entirely approved by the local church, and it's all overseen by a bureaucratic figure named High Cleric Mercurian.
So it feels very localized. It feels like you are just dealing with regional politics and some shady merchants.
You think you're just cleaning up a corrupt town.
But then you hit R3 and the bottom just drops out. The curtain pulls back and you find out all of it. The slinks, the potions, the local clerics, all of it was an elaborate diversion orchestrated by a vampire servant of a much higher cosmic evil.
It's a huge bait and switch.
It reminds me of a sleight of hand magic trick. The designer makes you look at the goblins and the local politics with your left hand while he is literally stealing the cosmos with his right hand.
That's a great way to put it.
Because while the heroes were distracted by this low-level local corruption, the actual egg of the phoenix was stolen.
And we are not talking about a magical trinket hidden in a nearby cave either. The egg was taken to the negative material plane.
Oh man, the negative material plane.
Yeah, for anyone unfamiliar with the cosmology, this is a dimension composed of absolute entropy, darkness, and anti-life. It is a void that actively drains the life force out of anything that enters it.
I was looking at the environmental paradox of this in the sources, and it is amazing. The egg is guarded by a literal living phoenix.
Right.
So you have a creature of pure elemental fire and radiant life forced into a dimension of lightless, consuming void.
It's completely hostile to its own existence.
And just reaching this place sounds like a nightmare. The notes mention something called the Caves of Time, where players have to endure chronological disorientation just to find a historical portal from the distant past.
Simply because a modern doorway to this dimension doesn't even exist anymore.
Wow.
The narrative shift is staggering. You transition violently from standard terrestrial fantasy to high-stakes cosmic horror, but, the story is only half the equation here.
Right, the mechanics.
Exactly. The underlying physics of the module are where the true, unforgiving nature of the design reveals itself. We really should look at the mechanics of the egg itself.
Oh, I really need you to explain this to me because my brain broke a little bit reading about the fold box mechanic. I understand it's a trap, but how do the physics of this object actually work in the game, and why is it so lethal?
Okay, so the egg of the phoenix operates on dimensional physics, where the interior volume of the object is vastly larger than its exterior shell.
Like a bag of holding kind of thing.
Think of it more like a magical containment unit, holding back immense pressure. So if the players walk into the negative material plane and treat the encounter like a standard battle, meaning they just, draw their swords and hack and slash the phoenix to death.
Which is what players always do.
Right. But if they do that, the creature detonates in a 50-foot radius of pure magical fire.
And that explosion shatters the egg.
Yes.
And from what I read, because of those dimensional fold box physics, shattering the containment instantly triggers a total dimensional void.
It's catastrophic.
It sucks all surrounding matter directly into the astral plane. The text explicitly notes this includes all microscopic particles, meaning your characters are just instantly deleted from existence.
Instantly. There is no saving throw. You don't get to roll a 20-sided die to dodge out of the way or mitigate the damage. The vacuum triggers, and your character is permanently gone.
I have to push back on this. Instant deletion with zero chance to save.
I know, it sounds harsh.
Isn't that just objectively terrible, unfair game design? I mean, if you have spent months or years building up a character, giving them a backstory, getting attached to them, and a single explosion deletes them from the universe without even a dice roll, I'm flipping the table. That sounds miserable.
I completely agree. If you were playing this in a sprawling, relaxed home campaign with your friends on a Friday night, it would absolutely be seen as unfair and frustrating.
Yeah.
But we have to look at the context of why Frank Mentzer built this specific mechanic. This module wasn't meant for a casual home game.
Right.
It was a strict, standardized test.
Oh, right, for the tournaments.
Exactly. The instant deletion mechanic was an intentional barrier. It forced players to stop treating every problem like a nail that needed a sword.
So they had to actually think.
Yes. If you wanted to survive, you had to use negotiation, non-lethal subdual tactics, or incredibly precise spatial positioning. It was built to punish reckless, aggressive play because the module's entire purpose was to objectively measure player skill in a tournament setting.
Which brings us right back to that chaotic, sweaty convention floor in 1982.
Full circle.
The management at TSR, specifically General Manager Mike Carr, knew that the way people were playing at conventions was completely broken. The scoring was entirely subjective. So he hires Mentzer, and in November 1980, they create the Role-Playing Game Association, or the RPGA.
Right, and Mentzer's primary mandate was to tame the convention chaos.
Someone had to do it.
Before the RPGA stepped in, if you played in a tournament, winning was often based on a particular dungeon master's personal whim, or just whoever managed to grab the most gold pieces before the session ended. There was no real metric for skill.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The Egg of the Phoenix wasn't a book you could just walk into a hobby shop and buy off the shelf.
No, not at all.
It was a limited edition, mail-order exclusive, designed specifically for dues-paying members of the RPGA. And it stripped away all that unbalanced homebrew chaos we talked about earlier.
You couldn't just show up with whatever you wanted.
Right. You didn't get to bring your overpowered, rule-breaking wizard to the table. You were handed pre-generated, mathematically balanced characters, like a paladin named Athelstan.
The environment was tightly controlled. You were put on a strict 4-hour time limit, which forced the group to make decisive choices rather than arguing over trivial details for hours.
Which happens a lot in home games.
Oh, constantly.
Yeah.
Furthermore, the dungeon masters weren't just running monsters in these tournaments. They were effectively proctors. They scored the players using a highly detailed grading rubric.
So it's literally a test.
It was. It wasn't just about whether your character survived. You were evaluated on your role-playing acumen, your ability to cooperate with strangers as a team, and your actual encyclopedic knowledge of the game's rules.
It sounds like the earliest tabletop form of esports. They
Mm.
took a collaborative storytelling game and just completely gamified the experience of playing it.
That's a really good comparison. By standardizing the characters, the time limits, and the scoring, this 16-page booklet proved you could have a shared, competitive framework across hundreds of different tables simultaneously.
It's massive scale.
And this specific architecture laid the groundwork for what would become the huge living campaigns of later decades.
Oh, right.
For anyone unfamiliar with the term, a living campaign is a massive shared world format where thousands of players globally play the exact same adventures, and their collective results impact a persistent, ongoing storyline.
That's so cool.
Programs like Living City, Living Greyhawk, and the Modern Adventures League all trace their DNA directly back to the rigid tournament structure tested in the R-Series modules.
So Mentzer successfully builds this incredibly rigid, standardized system to save the conventions. But the irony is, while he is bringing mathematical order to the game tables, the actual company paying him is descending into absolute chaos.
The contrast between the product and the publisher is just striking. In 1982, the internal corporate environment at TSR was in deep turmoil.
Yeah, Gary Gygax is out in California, right?
Exactly. Co-founder Gary Gygax was spending massive amounts of time out in Hollywood. He was stepping away from daily creative oversight in Wisconsin to try and pitch a Dungeons & Dragons Saturday morning cartoon and get a live-action movie off the ground.
And while Gygax is in California, the Bloom brothers, Brian and Kevin, are taking over the operational reins. And they are driving this rapid, almost reckless corporate expansion.
Too much, too fast.
They decide to relocate the entire creative team to a massive new facility in Lake Geneva on Sheridan Springs Road. I mean, imagine trying to hit monthly publishing deadlines while your entire office is being boxed up and moved.
Oh, it's a nightmare. Art assets are being shuffled around, communication breaks down, and the production pipelines are severely disrupted.
And that is just the internal corporate drama. Externally, the culture at large is turning against the game entirely.
Right, we need to look at the rising cultural backlash of that era, which would eventually become known as the Satanic Panic.
Yeah.
In 1982, there was the tragic suicide of a teenager named Irving Bink Poling. His grieving mother discovered he had been playing Dungeons & Dragons, and she publicly blamed the game's themes for his death.
It was a huge story.
It was. This led her to form the advocacy group, BADD, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons.
Now, to be completely clear to you listening, our goal here is to simply impartially report on the historical pressures the company was facing, not to endorse the claims made by groups like BADD.
Exactly.
We are looking strictly at how this massive media firestorm impacted the actual publication of the game. Because the pressure was so intense, TSR was eventually forced to fundamentally change how they wrote their books.
The media scrutiny forced management to adopt a strict internal code of ethics. It functioned very similarly to the Comics Code Authority of the 1950s, dictating exactly what could and could not be depicted in the artwork and the writing to sanitize their public image.
So cleaning everything up.
Right. Demons and devils were scrubbed or renamed, and dark themes were heavily toned down.
But because of that disrupted production pipeline we mentioned earlier, the egg of the phoenix slipped out just before the sterilization took full effect.
It just squeaked by.
It stands as this fascinating time capsule. It retains all these deeply dark themes. The cosmic horror of the negative material plane, the systemic corruption of the church, the mind-controlled slaves. It was a product of an unrestrained, pre-corporate era that somehow just made it to print.
And the dark themes weren't the only things Mentzer managed to sneak past the distracted executives. He obviously used this tournament module to stealthily introduce an entire massive continent into the game's official lore.
I saw this note in the sources about a stealth campaign setting, and I really need to know the story here. Mentzer had a personal home game called Aquaria, right?
He did. Aquaria was his personal playground, and originally it heavily blended science fiction technology with traditional fantasy magic.
Oh, interesting.
Our archival sources note he was heavily inspired by the Valon sector map, which was published by a third-party company called Judges Guild. Mentzer loved this setting, but he knew he couldn't just drop pure, unlicensed sci-fi elements into an official TSR fantasy tournament module.
So he basically files off the serial numbers.
Yep.
He strips out the overt sci-fi technology, rebrands the kingdom as New Imperia, and uses the R-series modules as a Trojan horse to introduce this massive new landmass to the player base.
It was brilliant.
He actually managed to get official written approval from Gary Gygax to canonize this continent, placing it 5,000 miles east of the Flannis on the official planet of Earth.
It was strategically positioned to be the prologue for a massive lore expansion. He was laying the groundwork for years of future products.
But it doesn't work out.
No, it ends in a real tragedy for lore fans. As the company's financial priorities shifted, TSR eventually abandoned Aquaria entirely. They pivoted all their corporate resources toward the booming Dragonlance setting instead.
Dragonlance was just too big.
Exactly. So this massive, officially approved continent was just left to drift in obscurity, never fully realized.
Which makes the module feel like this weird, orphaned artifact. I mean, you have a tournament grinder set in a forgotten continent, published by a company in chaos.
Very strange mix.
But the story doesn't end in 1982. 5 years later, in 1987, the module gets resurrected, and the attempt to repackage it brings a whole new wave of behind-the-scenes chaos.
By 1987, TSR decided they wanted to monetize these old tournament ventures for the general public. They brought in legendary designer Jennell Jaquays and tasked her with combining Mentzer's 4 fragmented 16-page convention pamphlets R1 through R4 into a single, cohesive 80-page supermodule.
And they published it for retail as I-12, Egg of the Phoenix.
Right.
And reading the retrospectives, she used a design philosophy that the gaming community literally named after her, Jaquaysing.
Yes, Jaquaysing.
People talk about Jaquaysing a dungeon like it's a verb. What does that actually mean mechanically when you are, like, drawing out a map?
Well, Jaquaysing is a pioneering method of nonlinear dynamic dungeon design. Instead of drawing a single straight hallway that forces players to fight monster A, then trap B, then boss C, Jaquaysing creates architectural loops.
Okay.
It introduces secret vertical drops, multiple interconnected entrances, and overlapping paths. Mechanically, it means a clever player can bypass an impossible fight by finding a forgotten ventilation shaft or discover a back door to the boss room.
So it gives the players actual choices?
Exactly. She took what was essentially a linear point-scoring tournament track and provided the connective architectural tissue to transform it into a holistic, sprawling campaign environment.
She gave the map a sense of living geography, but the actual text she was working with, the tonal whiplash between Mentzer's different tournament encounters, is just unbelievable.
It's all over the place.
I mean, on one page of this supermodule, you have the absolute void of the negative material plane and the cosmic horror of mind-controlled slaves. And on the very next page, you stumble into a literal sitcom family of fire giants having a loud domestic dispute in their living room.
It is an incredibly jarring juxtaposition. Mentzer loved injecting moments of theatrical surrealism to test how players would react to the absurd.
Oh, I'm sure.
For example, in one section of the repackaged adventure, the players enter a demiplane featuring a giant, skull-faced moon that actively tries to murder them from the sky.
How do you even fight a moon? You can't exactly swing a battle axe at a celestial body.
You really can't.
And then there's Imix, the Prince of Evil Fire. If you read the official monster manuals of the time, Imix is canonically supposed to be this terrifying 18-foot-tall pillar of twisting elemental flame. But when he shows up in this module, he manifests as a 20-foot-tall Red Bull.
The depiction of Imix really highlights how fluid the canon was before tight editorial continuity was enforced across the product lines. Mentzer just wrote what he thought was visually interesting for a tournament encounter.
Just whatever looked cool.
Yeah. But when Jaquays compiled all of this gonzo, unrestrained tone into one manuscript in 1987, it caused a literal mutiny within TSR's own art department.
Oh, this is easily my favorite detail in the entire stack of sources.
It's so good.
The 1987 manuscript lands on the desks of the TSR art department. Staff artist Bill Willingham takes one look at the descriptions of the Skull Moons and the Sitcom Giants, calls the contents entirely ridiculous, and publicly declares that these are clearly just the private fantasies of the author.
Shots fired.
Can you imagine working in a corporate office and flat out refusing to draw a domestic dispute between fire giants? Several staff artists joined him and literally staged a mutiny.
The internal pushback was so severe, and the refusal to work on the project was so absolute that TSR had to scramble. They were forced to outsource the interior black and white art to freelance illustrators just to meet their printing deadlines.
That is wild.
Though despite the internal rebellion, they did manage to secure a stunning, vibrant, oil-painted cover by the legendary Keith Parkinson for for the final retail release.
Which definitely gave it a veneer of prestige. Before we wrap up, we also have to give Mentzer credit for a massive visual innovation in that original 1982 printing long before the 1987 repackage.
Oh, the maps. Yes.
When he drafted the original maps himself, he ditched the standard flat, top-down 2D grids that everyone was using. He introduced isometric maps to the game.
That was a profound leap forward for the medium. Isometric projection, drawing the maps at an angle to show 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional page, allowed both players and dungeon masters to intuitively visualize verticality.
It makes such a difference.
It really does. They could see depth, elevation changes, and complex 3D architectural volume. It bridged the gap between abstract, flat wargaming and truly immersive environment exploration.
And doing it in a 16-page pamphlet.
By proving it could be done in such a small format, it paved the way for iconic future modules that relied heavily on 3D architecture, most notably the castle maps in Ravenloft.
So, what does this all mean for us today? We have a fragile tournament module with instant death vacuum mechanics, a stealth continent that got abandoned, a literal mutiny in the art department over a killer moon, and somehow the foundational blueprint for modern organized play.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it really highlights what gaming historians often refer to as the Jaquaysing paradox.
Okay.
The egg of the phoenix is 2 entirely contradictory things coexisting in the same document. On one hand, it is a rigid mathematical point-scoring tournament tool deliberately designed to objectively test skill and tame the convention chaos.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it is a wildly untamed dimension-hopping epic filled with surreal skull moons, internal company rebellions, and abandoned lore.
It is the ultimate paradox of that transitionary era of gaming.
And to you, listening right now, thinking about your own hobbies or the games you play, what stands out to you? Because without this bizarre 16-page booklet, the very concept of a shared, standardized convention experience, the idea that you can sit down with strangers anywhere in the world and play the exact same fair, balanced game simply wouldn't exist in its current form.
It really did tame the Wild West.
It successfully tamed, yeah.
It gave us the perfectly balanced competitive framework that modern players enjoy today. But, looking back at the sheer lunacy of this module, it leaves you with something to mull over. When you consider the sitcom fire giants, the killer celestial bodies, and the ruthless instant death fold boxes, did the triumph of organized, mathematically balanced play ultimately cost tabletop gaming its raw, unrestrained, and dangerous kitchen sink imagination? Did we trade the magic for the math? Something to think about the next time you sit down at the table.